we should all be in control of our own happiness at work.
But most people's narrative is not that.
Anybody out there who isn't enjoying your job, you should enjoy your job. There are 2 positive things you can do about that and 1 negative thing. The thing that tends to drive happiness more is recognition, actually telling people they've done a good job. Working at home, hybrid, working away from home, the happiest group are the hybrid workers. If you're happy in your job, you are paid more, you're more likely to be promoted. It's in your interest to be happy at work.
Firstly, Lord Mark Price, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. All the way from Victoria. For the viewers and guests, we're going to talk about 3 big things. We're going to talk about happiness in the workplace, well-being, which is a huge topic at the moment. Everyone's been talking about it for us. I wanted to have a little look to the future, to future of work, and touch a little bit on economic outlook, all the different things going on around us in the world at the moment, and how that might affect people's mindsets, our happiness. Mark, thanks so much for joining me.
You're very welcome. It's lovely to be with you, Lewis.
Thank you. Thank you. You were just telling me about your earlier career and how you've started to appreciate and feel gratitude toward things later on. So I'd just love to hear kind of how you've got to running WorkL, founding WorkL, your earlier career at Waitrose, John Lewis. Just want to hear how that's evolved and how you've ended up campaigning, so to speak, and talking about happiness and well-being and things.
I'll try and give you the slightly abridged version because if I did a full summary of what I've done, it could go on for quite a long time. But so I joined the John Lewis Partnership as a graduate trainee in 1982. So an awful long time ago. I did want to be either a pro golfer. I read archaeology and ancient history at university, so I did a diving course in my last year, and I was perhaps going to be a marine archaeologist. There was a vessel they were excavating off the coast of Ostia in Italy, but my dear old dad said get a proper job, so I applied for a few, and John Lewis, I'm really grateful, offered me a job on their graduate training program.
Great.
And I spent 34 years with John Lewis. I worked through the department store side. I was the managing director of a couple of their department stores. Then I went over to Waitrose. I was retail and marketing director. Then I moved on to the partnership's main board as strategy and IT director, which the title was development director. And then I went to run Waitrose. I had 10 marvellous years running Waitrose.
Amazing.
The last 3 years I was there, I was also deputy chairman. So that was my sort of 34 years in retail and John Lewis Partnership. Towards the end of my time there, I was thinking about what would I do when I retired from the partnership. So I started taking on NED roles. So I was deputy chairman of Channel 4 TV, and I set up the Prince's Countryside Fund, so now the King's Countryside Fund. I chaired a big business charity called Business in the Community. I did that for a number of years. And so I thought when I left Waitrose and John Lewis, I'd go into this kind of plural career.
Were you doing both of those at the same time towards the end of your wage? Yeah.
Yeah. So I deliberately decided to take some NEDs on towards the end of my career. Yeah. So I was preparing myself for a life after John Lewis of doing lots of NED. And then out of the blue, David Cameron asked me to be the UK's trade minister. So instead of taking some time off when I left John Lewis and Waitrose, I went straight to be the UK's trade minister. He asked me 8 days before the Brexit vote.
Oh, no. Did you have to stop all the Ned stuff?
I had everything.
Everything.
Yeah. I had books that were going to be published. I couldn't publish any books. All the Ned stuff. I remember going and talking to a wonderful man, Jeremy Hayward, who was the top civil servant, and he was the one who first said to me, "Look, the Prime Minister's minded to ask you to do this. Would you accept?" And I said to him, "Look, I've just got all these NED roles. I'm going to be chairman of this. I'm going to join the board of the British Museum," which for me would have been a dream, having read archaeology. And he said, "Well, I'm afraid you can't do any. So you'll become the trade minister. You'll go to the House of Lords so that you can do the job."
And was this just before the referendum vote?
8 days before Cameron announced the referendum.
Right.
So, and when Cameron and I chatted, he didn't even say to me, "Look, Mark, this is going to happen on your watch," and da-di-da-di-da. So that was all a bit of a shock, Lewis. So, I did that job, and then it changed dramatically when we had the Brexit vote, and my job became, I moved to be Trade Minister for Trade Policy, which means the person that's responsible for doing the trade deals.
Right.
As opposed to inward and external investment. So
did that all start even before the referendum kicked off?
No, because through that build-up, I campaigned to remain. So I was part of the government and making the argument to remain. And then when the vote happened, my job changed. So all of a sudden, I then had to ensure that all those countries that we had trade deals with, because we were a member of the EU, they all rolled over and we had trade deals with them as the UK alone. So I spent over a year on an aeroplane flying all over the world just persuading people to keep the trade deals with the UK, which they all did. One or two said, we want better terms, we want that, to which the simple answer was, that's fine, but if you want that, we're not going to be able to do it in time, and so we'll have to come back and renegotiate with you in the future.
So interesting. And two questions on that. Were you surprised at the referendum result? And then secondly, as you were going around the world speaking to all these different countries, what was the general feeling about what had happened?
Westminster's a bubble and London's a bubble. And so if you live and work in London, you were pretty sure that it was going to be a vote to remain. If you moved outside London, then you became less certain. And it was really about a week before the result, for the very, very first time, there was a sentiment that it actually could go the other way. But if you remember, even on the evening, Nigel Farage sort of at one point said, we're not going to win, I accept defeat, but it's not over. So, even to the last minute, it was sort of in the balance. But it was a surreal time to be a minister and to be arguing the case for Britain to remain in the EU. So it was an incredible experience to go through that. In terms of countries around the world, by and large, they thought we were nuts. The UK had developed a really good position for itself where we were the number one country for inward investment into Europe. So we got more money from outside the EU coming into the UK. And that's because people like UK law, like the time zone, like the labour laws, like the fact that we weren't in the euro, and could invest there and export into Europe and the rest of the world. So we were a good place to invest. So all of a sudden we made it a lot harder for people to invest in the UK. So, by and large, businesses thought it was a silly thing to do, and governments have a lot on their plate. So all of a sudden to have to renegotiate a trade deal with the UK, and for most of them, they just thought that rolling over existing terms was just an easy way to solve that problem. But no, there weren't many places I went to in the world and people were saying, good on you, great decision.
Yeah. Sounds similar to the tariff stuff that's going on at the moment.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's just an act of self-harm. Sanctions and tariffs are really penalties. And I think that, when I watched some of those early interviews from the Trump camp, it was almost as though they thought that it was the exporting country, the foreign country, that paid the tariff, and it isn't. So it's the American people now who are paying the tariff because it's the importer that pays the tariff. So the company in America that's importing the goods, and then they'll pass it on to the consumer. So it's inflationary. Yeah. And the bet from America is that somehow what will happen is that businesses will move their manufacturing from somewhere abroad to America, but the cost of labour is massive. I think the average American manufacturing worker earns $108,000 a year, which is 10 times more what somebody in Vietnam earns or China earns. So the cost of production will go up if you move it to the USA. So I think that the Trump administration is right to think about the trade imbalances and how you start to correct them. I think that mechanism is just too simplistic. We'll just charge them all a lot in tariffs, and therefore people will want to manufacture here, because it's not straightforward. Even if you decide to make that investment, and with the cost of labour and production in America, it's actually going to be any cheaper than paying the tariff.
Yeah. Well, it'd be interesting to see what happens, because on the one side, it's just, as you just kicked off a negotiation, just, you're right, we're going to charge you 1,000% tariffs and whatever as a start. So we're interesting to see where they land, because I think the one interesting thing with Donald Trump is he's very happy to change his mind and go back on his word. And, so that's quite interesting to look at. And then the other thing I'm finding quite interesting is just maybe the unintended consequences of how it's resetting and realigning other countries' relationships and trade deals and how they interact with each other and how it's affecting Europe. And so all of that is a fascinating thing, because the one thing he's done is certainly disrupt the world. And just how that all kind of lands, it's gonna be really interesting. And then I think related to work and jobs, and again, that's all been very interesting to see. So
my view is that it presents an opportunity for the UK. I think we're in a better position to most to strike a good trade deal with the USA. But it will make us reset our relationship with Europe. So if you look at exports France is the second biggest exporter in the EU to the UK after Germany. Last year, French exports to the UK shrank by 1.5%, or roughly £900 million. And their exports to the UK have been shrinking every year since Brexit. And so there's an absolute imperative now for the French, the Germans, the Spanish, the Italians to want to do something to improve exports back to the UK, particularly if they're going to suffer with exports to the USA. So there's a particular window at the moment where we could get some kind of improved trade deal with the EU and at the same time strike a deal with the USA that's better than others might achieve, and that would give us a competitive advantage. So I think there's a window of opportunity for the UK. And at the same time, the things that tariffs will do is that our interest rates will fall faster than they would have ordinarily. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's 3 or 4 interest rate falls this year. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're bigger than people think. Energy prices will come down because fuel prices are going to come down. And I think that the production of goods around the world that was destined for America will make goods more generally cheaper, and therefore I think you could see this being deflation in the UK. So from a macroeconomic point of view, although there's a challenge with America that which hopefully we can negotiate, we could end up with better trade relationships with the EU and making exports easier, lower interest rates, lower inflation, all of which will be great for the UK economy. So this government might get lucky on the back of what's happened.
It might do. Because on the other side of the coin, and I agree with you on that, I'd like the UK to be open for business. And I think given what's gone on the last few months, certainly like small businesses have really struggled, because you've got the national insurance has gone up, tax, and so it's struggling. And you are seeing on the other side a lot of high net worths leave the UK, small businesses struggling. So there's this interesting dynamic going on. I agree, there's a massive opportunity. Like in these times, there's always opportunity. We talked about Warren Buffett a little bit before. And in these moments, there's always opportunity. So hopefully the UK grabs it. And as well as, the opportunity to negotiate trade deals, better deals and stuff, also just making sure that this is a place that people want to come to, live in, work in, earn money, pay tax, all of that stuff.
No, I agree with you, Lewis. And I think the next thing is incredibly difficult for business. It is a tax on jobs. Research that we've done at Workall recently said that 31% of the businesses that we work with have cut their labour force, 38% are not hiring. And of the rest, they were either non-committal, and I think only about 15% were actively hiring.
And these are small businesses or
all sizes across the board. So there's no doubt that 25 billion that's going to be raised from national insurance has made business reflect on hiring and recruitment. And then, of course, there's the issues that may come with the new workers' rights bill that's currently going through the House, and I think that will have an impact. I think also the increased taxation on taxing the wealthy, capital gains, etc.
Oh, yes, yeah.
I mean that's had an impact. I mean, people have gone, and just recently the Treasury announced that capital gains tax receipts were down 10%. And I think what the government yet haven't worked through is that you need entrepreneurs to power the economy. It's small businesses and medium-sized businesses that really power the economy. More than 80%, far more than 80% of the businesses in the UK are small and medium-sized businesses. Yeah. I think there's only 5,000 businesses, I say only 5,000 businesses in the UK that employ more than 3,000 people. So the rest of the workforce, 30 million,
in small
they're all in small businesses. And you need to reward people for creating jobs and paying taxes. Over 80% of the taxes that are raised in the UK come directly or indirectly from business. So business is the engine of growth. And you have to be prepared to reward people for taking risks and growing businesses and employing people. And at the moment, that's missing from the equation.
Massively, yeah. There's a lot of business owners I speak to, and a lot are choosing to set up elsewhere or move their operations elsewhere. It's very easy to do that now. It's a very mobile, global workforce. People are very happy to move around. So if you're not careful, because I think there's also been a little bit of complacency, because the UK is a great spot. To your earlier point, solid legal framework, you can put your money in the bank, it's going to be safe, all of these kinds of things. But again, if you're not careful, people will choose other places. So
Well, I think that's right. There are some really good things that the government are trying to do. I mean, looking at house building, looking at bureaucracy, trying to make it easier for people to do business. Some of the things they're doing about investment, pension funds. So they are doing some good things. And talking about growth is great, and wanting investment and encouraging investment. But at the moment, they've done so much on the other side about raising taxes, employment rights, that it's been a counterbalance to the good stuff they're doing. Yeah. My hope is that, as I say, we get lucky with trade deals, we get lucky with interest rates falling, we get lucky with some deflation from oil and for other reasons, and that starts to put the balance in favour of, you should come and invest in the UK. It's a great place to
I'd love to see what they did with you is get business people in who have know what it's like to make payroll every month, and just who've been in business. I'd love to see some. I don't know if there are. It doesn't appear to be.
Different governments are lots of people say that to me, and having spent 2 years in the government and now another 6 years in the House of Lords, politics is very different to business. I mean, it's just a different game. I do think there are some good things about getting business people to go in. I think James Timpson was a great appointment to go and be prisons minister. He's a good guy. But I don't think necessarily that the skills that a business person have necessarily translate to what you need to be a politician.
Like Elon and Doge, a bit of a...
It's a good example, yeah. I mean, because he just goes in and says, look, it's all very straightforward. We need to cut costs. We're just going to do it. But it's more complicated and the consequences are greater. And really understanding what you're doing and the levers that you pull and the consequences you get and how you take people along. And what you've got to remember is that even within your own party, there are people that will try and pull you down because they've got their own political aspirations, let alone what the opposition will do, let alone what the press will do, let alone what NGOs will do. And so you're managing on so many levels. And as one very, very well-known politician said to me, and I won't mention their name, we're empowered to be elected. The whole point of being in government is to be re-elected and to stay in government, because when you're not in government, you can't do anything. Yeah. But quite often when you are in government, they paralyse themselves because they know the decision will be a difficult decision, and therefore it will lose them votes. And so it's about, it's almost like they see it as a war of attrition, where they think, if I make this decision, I'm going to lose this group. If I make this decision, I'm going to then lose this group on top, until they get this diminishing return and they know they're not going to be elected. Yeah. Business just isn't like
benevolent dictatorships, right?
Well, it may surprise you to know that having looked at all kinds of different models, as Churchill famously said that democracy is the least bad option. But benevolent dictatorships,
as in a company, is a benevolent dictatorship.
Yeah, but also you look at Singapore and what they were able to do there with that kind of approach.
Amazing.
I'm not advocating that for the UK before anybody starts challenging me. I do think democracy is the right thing. It's messy, but there are cases where I think that a benign autocracy or empathetic autocracy does have some advantages.
Yeah, that's interesting. So moving on to happiness, because I think it's links so well. So at what point you've done your like successful business career, sounds like a crazy political career. And at what point did were you thinking about happiness and happiness of your team and employees the whole way through? And what point did it become so important to you to focus on it?
Well, it became important on my very first day working for John Lewis, when my then managing director, a guy called Brian O'Callaghan, met with the 5 graduates who joined on that day. And he began by saying that in the constitution of the John Lewis Partnership, Clause 1 said that the supreme purpose of the John Lewis Partnership is the happiness of the people that work there. Nice. And a guy called Speed & Lewis founded the business. He was the son of John Lewis, who founded the eponymous department store on Oxford Street. And he had this idea after his father that if my people are happy, they'll stay longer. I'll have lower staff turnover, lower costs of recruitment. If my people are happy, they'll take less time off sick. If my people are happy, the training will stick. If the training sticks and they're happy, my customers will get better service. If my customers get better service over the long, medium term, we'll be a more successful business. So I then spent 34 years trying to work out, what does it really mean to be happy at work? What are the drivers of happiness at work? And the John Lewis Partnership were brilliant to me. I went to a number of business schools, INSEAD and London Business School and Columbia, and at each of them I was given the time and space to really think about that. I read widely. And then during my time at Waitrose, of course, I became responsible for delivering that in the team there. So right at the end of my time, I remember saying to the then chairman that he said to me, what are you going to do in the future? And I said, well, one of the things I want to do is take the lessons that I've learned about the power of having a happy workforce and try to spread that word as far as I can. I wrote a book called I always forget the title of the book, Fairness for All. And in Fairness for All, I set out the model and the things that I discovered. Yeah. So I always had it in mind to publish that book. I actually couldn't publish it until the end of my time in government because you're not allowed to be a minister and publish a book. But right at the end of my time, Theresa May said that I could, which was very kind of her. And then I decided, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a website. A very brilliant woman called Kelly Brewer, who had her own tech business. I met her, I was introduced to her, and she started to build that for me. Great. And the idea was that we would put a happy at work test online, that it would be free for anybody to go and use. And at the end of it, it would tell you where you were happy in your job based on all the things that I'd learned. And if you weren't, what you could do about it. So that was the sort of the genesis of Workle, and that was in 2018. I started 2019 in reality, sort of launched something. Yeah. But not long after, Lewis, businesses started to come to me to say, this is really interesting. Would you work with our business? And so we then built the platform for businesses to use. So we now work with 1,000 companies. We run the Sunday Times Best Places to Work for the Sunday Times. And then we now do that around the world. So we do the same in Ireland and Australia and the Philippines and South Africa. This week we launched in Egypt. We do it in the UAE. Next month we launch in India. By the end of the year, we think we'll be running Best Place to Work awards in 20 countries probably around the world.
Amazing.
And
what are
about 10,000 people a week now go to Workle and take our Happy at Work test. And when they do that, they tell us where they work. So we've built up a database now of over 100,000 organisations globally where there's data on what it's like to work there. And then we link that to jobs in those companies. So we try and help people find a job in a company where people like them are happy. So sort of from that thought, whatever it was, 7-8 years ago now, we work with 1,000 businesses, run awards around the year, and thousands of individuals come to the site and take the test.
Love that. Congrats.
Thank you.
What are some of the top things that you find make people happy at work? And then maybe follow up to that, are you seeing any variation in terms of age demographic, region, or are you finding human to human? And actually, it's just,
So I have a saying that if you've got your head in the oven and your feet in the fridge, you're an average temperature, but you're not in good shape. And the reason I hate averages, and the reason that's important is that every group are different. So 20-year-olds are different to 60-year-olds, are different to 40-year-olds. Men and women are different. LGBTQ plus score differently to people with a disability, and even within that, there are differences. So what we're able to do is to measure differences by demographics, but also we've got data on 195 countries. So every January we announce the world's happiest workplaces around the world, and there are country differences. So yes, there are large differences, and I'm almost embarrassed to talk about averages because they're meaningless because of the reason that you say it's individual to you. I can remember when I was running Waitrose, we ran a staff survey, and there were a few things about it that I didn't think were as good as they could be, which is why I built the survey we've got at Workle to use with businesses. One of them was that it used to take a very long time from taking the survey to ever getting any results. Right. Secondly, people never felt anything really happened on the back of the results. So I took a survey, there's been no change, I haven't seen any action. So people became skeptical of them. And then lastly, people would say that when they did see the results, it bore no resemblance to what they scored or they did. So I became a great advocate for results being instant, results being actionable. So you have an action plan straight away, a sort of instant action software we've developed. And then lastly, every individual gets results. So we work with Next and Moto, all sorts of companies. And the great thing about those is not only does the manager get feedback on their people and where they can be developed, but also every individual in the company gets their own feedback.
Oh, right.
So that makes them more likely to, believe the results and do something about their own happiness at work. Because by and large, we should all be in control of our own happiness at work. It shouldn't be left for somebody else to dictate that.
100%. But most people's narrative is not that. Most people's narrative is the company needs to provide this, provide that. I don't know if you see that, but I see that a lot. And I think absolutely you need to take ownership of your own life, career. I think a big problem is like this work-life balance phrase, because the opposite of life is death, and everyone equates work to death. And it's like it's not a good spot to be in, But I think once you take ownership, you get a lot of agency. It's empowering, and you can make changes. Because I think being happy at work, I think it also bleeds into everything, because your life is your life. You can't separate work. You can't separate personal and it's integrated. Yeah. So I think I agree with you. It's important to take ownership.
I remember going to the London Business School, and there was a brilliant professor there called Rob Goffey, and he was the professor in human resources, HR personnel. And there were two lessons that I took away from all the lectures with him that had stayed with me. The first was nobody's perfect, but a team can be. There was a paper written on it, and also he did some exercises. And what those exercises taught you, and the reading around them taught you, was that no one individual is perfect. We're all on a spectrum of ability in certain aspects of our management and behaviours. And so to strike the right note with every individual all the time is impossible. To think that you've got the entire skill set that's needed to be a great strategist and to look after the detail and be a marketeer and be operationally or administratively sound, nobody can do all of that. And the lesson I learned from him is it's okay for you not to be perfect. It's okay for you to have weaknesses. But what you need to do is surround yourself with people who compensate for your weaknesses. And the thing you should do is to say to them how much you value them, because they're really good at the things that you're not really good at. And they should focus on that, and you should focus on the things that you're good at. So that was one lesson. The other lesson, which goes to the point that you've just been making about enjoying your job, you should enjoy your job. I mean, anybody out there who isn't enjoying your job, you should enjoy your job. And he said there are two positive things you can do about that and one negative thing. The first positive thing, if you aren't enjoying your job, is to tackle the issue. If you know what it is that's upsetting you, you go and speak to your manager or you go and speak to your colleague, whatever it is that's the frustration, and you do something about it. That's positive. The second positive thing he said you could do is let it go. He said not everything in life is perfect. You may be doing a job you really enjoy, but there's one thing that irritates you about it. If you're not prepared to change it and you're prepared to live with it, just let it go. Don't dwell on it. Let it go. Accept it as being part of the job that you do. He said the worst thing that you can do, the one thing that you must never do, the negative thing, is just to moan about it. So wake up in the morning and say to your partner, I can't believe I'm doing this today. I hate so-and-so. You get into work, you moan to your colleagues. You get home, you moan to your partner again. You moan to your friends. And it's not good. It's not good for any of them, and it's not good for you. And at the moment in the UK, there are about 1.1 million jobs at the moment. Open jobs at the moment in the UK, 1.1 million jobs. So it's not that there aren't jobs out there. It's just that you need to take control, or as you used the word earlier, agency. You need to take control of your life. When I started with John Lewis in 82, there was a very paternal relationship between the company and an individual. It was, we will decide what training you go on, what job you do, if and when you're promoted, where you'll work. The company owned your labour. That's completely changed now with all that's happened online. So if you go to Workle, you can take a Happy at Work test for free. You can get career development off the back of it. You can find a job in a company where you'll be happier. And we're not alone. There are other organisations that do that. Yeah. And so all of a sudden, you have been given the power to take control, to find a job where you'll be happy, or to think about those areas where you're not happy. I've got a book coming out in September that's called Work Happier, and it's for individuals so that they can read and understand how to be happy at work. So there's lots of resources. So there really is no excuse to moan, except I've come to the conclusion, if you actually like moaning, and what you want to do, you just want to have a little moan about where you go. But if you're doing that routinely, as I say, it's not good for the people around you, and it's
no. But that I agree, like that. But that, unfortunately, that narrative is so common, and it's very self-limiting, and I don't know. I guess you don't get. I was thinking about this the other day. It's like, you go to school, right, and you kind of like do your GCSEs. Let's say you do your A levels, you go to university, you go into like a large company, you go through these management training programs and things like that. And often you're not really taught how to think, how to learn, how to work with others. It's often like, I, until you get into a leadership role, then suddenly it's we. And you're having to like run it. So it's not. We're not. I don't think we're preparing people for that. And you don't learn that mindset stuff at school.
I agree with you. And I was chairman of the Chartered Management Institute. And while I was chair there, we did a piece of research on skills managers have and skills managers need. And what we found is that over 80% of people who had been promoted had been promoted either because they'd got a technical qualification, they'd become a qualified accountant or a lawyer or a whatever, or they'd just been in the job a long time, and because they'd been around a long time and they knew how everything worked, they were promoted. What they weren't given was any training in what I would term to be core skills, others term as soft skills, which is how do you get the best from people. And it's absolutely essential that managers understand what it is that makes people at work happy, what it is that drives extra discretionary effort, because ultimately there are only two things that managers control that make a real difference on a business. Capital, so where you invest your money. So every day, every business in the UK is making the decision about where do they put the money that they have to invest, and every one of their competitors will be making a similar decision. So what do you invest in? Where do you think you're going to get the best return and competitive advantage? That's number one. And that's all about strategy, really. The second is, can you get more from your people than your competitors get from their people? Do your people give more? Are they willingly prepared to work harder? Are they more committed? And if you get those two things right, you will be successful. You're allocating money in the right place and you're getting more from your people. They're the only two things to think about. And yet quite often people are promoted into management positions and they don't think about those things. They're thinking about the technical aspects of their job.
Yeah. But that's often, it's classic, right? You're the best salesperson. Well, go manage a sales team. You're the best engineer. Go manage an engineering team. And they're very different jobs. You're not trained on it, to your point. Maybe there should be other career paths. But also, to go back to the individual, is if you can't look after yourself, how are you going to look after anyone else? How are you going to lead by example? Because you can be a leader in any level of an organisation by the way you behave, look after yourself, learn, deal with others, all of those kinds of things. I think, to your point as well, sport's such a great example. Look at sports teams. I mean, like Liverpool just won the Premier League. Arne Slot, who's a Liverpool manager, he's been there a year. He bought no players and spent no money. Inherited a good team, but they weren't looking like they were going to win the Premier League. And he's come in and he's developed these players. They all seem happy. They're working for each other. It's a great example of how you can get the right pieces in, how people are supporting each other and stuff. I think it's also easier said than done.
Yeah, but I think sport's a great example. If you take football, the capital you have to invest is in players. Are you going to buy the right players, and are those players going to fit in the system that you want to play? And then the manager, can I get the best from those players? Yeah. And so, I mean, that's a great illustration about there are only two things that are important: the money you're going to invest and where you invest it, and then do you get the best from your human resource?
Yeah, and Man United haven't done so well on that recently. Reading a stat,
I think we're straying into difficult ground.
I think I've read a stat only because I saw it yesterday. They had the worst stats for 30 years or something. Spent lots of money, haven't quite got the management of it right, and So anyway, I find all that quite interesting. But if you are, let's kind of moving on to the leader. I mean, because leaders are humans too, right? How can you go about making sure that your team members are all happy and performing?
So that really comes to the 6 steps, the things that I discovered through my time in John Lewis and have built into Workall that really dictate whether people are happy at work. So they're a nice to have. So if you've got a friend at work, that's great. But if you've got a bad boss and you're not paid well and you're not treated with respect, frankly, that doesn't make you happy in and of itself. It's great to have free beer on a Friday night or a pool table, but in and of themselves, they're not going to make you happy. So 6 things I discovered that drive your happiness at work. The first is reward and recognition, so your pay. And that's really, do I feel that I'm being paid fairly? Yeah. If you think you're being paid 10% less than you are worth, then that niggles away at you all the time. It's a constant, this isn't fair. If you're paid 10% more than you think you are worth, you don't really give any more. You don't go in every day saying, you know what, I'd do this for 10% less. So pay is a hygiene factor. It's one of those things you need to get right, but it really doesn't drive happiness and performance. You just need to pitch it in the right place for the individual. And individuals don't look at pay in absolute terms. They look at it in relative terms. By that, what I mean is somebody who works in a Waitrose doesn't look at what a professional footballer is earning at £100,000 a week and say that's not fair. What they do is they look at what somebody doing a similar job to them is earning in Waitrose or in Tesco or in Sainsbury's. So people think about their pay and if it's fair in a relative term. The thing that tends to drive happiness more is recognition, actually telling people they've done a good job, recognizing and noticing. One of the great skills in management is just noticing things, noticing that somebody's made an effort, noticing that somebody's gone the extra mile, and then thanking them for that. So recognition is a far bigger driver of happiness on a day-to-day basis than pay is.
Have you noticed any difference with? So you started 2019, and then we had COVID, and there was obviously loads of talk on flexibility, work from home, remote, going into the office. We've also got a lot of AI, and people are feeling, I think, a little bit nervous that their job might be displaced. Maybe like the farm worker when the combine harvester was coming down the track or something. Have you seen anything in the data and all the surveys you're doing to indicate that this has been high up on people's agenda?
Well, flexibility. So we asked the question about, are you happy with the hours you work? Flexibility has always been high on people's agenda. So what you find is that people who have flexibility over their working life score more highly in our survey on their happiness than people who don't have that ability to be flexible. In terms of working at home, hybrid, and working away from home, the happiest group are the hybrid workers.
Are they?
Then it's working from home, then it's permanently working away from home. And the reason for the hybrid workers being happiest is that they get the both of best world. They get flexibility to an extent in working from home and how they do that, but also they get the community, the collaboration that comes from being in a workplace with people. And that's particularly true of younger people coming into the workforce in their 20s. We find that older people would very happily work from home and never go back to the office. So
and younger
50s
people,
and 60s.
hybrids,
Younger workers, they're more predisposed to the office. Older workers more predisposed to working from home.
Doesn't quite match it, doesn't it? Because typically, like, these people, the older folks are the leaders. You've been in your career for a while. They don't want to come in. Then you've got the younger people who want to learn from these people and want the human contact, but they're coming in, but these people aren't coming in. And you need to find some kind of happy balance, I think, don't you?
I think that's right. I think that you put your finger on one of the great conundrums post-COVID, that those that are leaving, by and large, are not necessarily the ones that actually do want to go back to the office. But all of our research has said that the hybrid model seems to have the greatest benefits to the greatest number of people. And there's a thing about, we can't trust people if they work from home. The evidence doesn't bear that out at all. The people that perhaps aren't pulling their weight when they were in the office are the people who aren't pulling their weight when they're at home.
Oh, yeah.
There's no data that says conclusively people aren't putting in a shift at home.
No, definitely. It's like I remember back in the day, it's like, it was snowing outside and you could write a list of who wasn't turning up. You get it like person for person. So you're right. But it's still, you've got to trust people. And there's always this classic of earn my trust. But I think now you've got to be like, you give someone trust off the bat, measure output rather than time. And, that's quite a good place to be in. But I think also if you're doing a job where you're able to do that, you've got to be super grateful, to your earlier point, because there are many jobs where you have to go in. If you're working in a hospital or whatever it might be. So I think,
but those jobs, Lewis, they have their own benefits. So there are people that like to work as part of a community, either that's serving the general public or being part of a team, and some people derive their energy from being in a group, being active. Other people get energy from being on their own and being reflective. We're all different. So there are different things, but it's trying to understand what kind of personality am I, and therefore what kind of job's going to suit me best.
Yeah. Interesting. So since you started at John Lewis and you were thinking through what makes people happy at work, if you compare that time to now, where we have, again, you said generational differences. You've got some people who want to work at home and are more productive at home. Some people want to go into the office. Has it got a bit more complex now, the role of a leader in trying to make your team happy, or actually the fundamentals?
No, I think the fundamentals are the same. And that's what I've tried to do in my writing and in Workle. So as I was saying, there were 6 things. So the first is reward and recognition. Second thing the good manager does is keep their team informed. Information in 2 ways. One, am I well enough informed to do my job to a high standard? Am I well trained? And then it's about what's the context for what I'm doing, what's happening in this country. So sharing of information, really good managers are good at. The third is empowering people, trusting people to go and do the job, and then being prepared to coach people when it doesn't go as well as it might, listening to people's views, just respecting the individual for who they are. So empowerment. The fourth is well-being, feeling that your manager genuinely cares about you, taking a few minutes to say, how's everything at home, da-di-da, as well as how's everything at work. So mental, physical, financial well-being. The fifth is sense of pride. So your manager makes you feel proud of the job you're doing, proud of the company that you're working in. And then lastly, a really good manager will develop your career and think about what you need to develop over the course of time. And so for all of those reasons, if you were to stop somebody in the street to find out how happy they were in their job, you just ask this one question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how well do you get on with your manager? If somebody says 10, I know that in our survey they'll score in the 80%. If they say 1, I know in our survey they'll score in the 20%. So a good relationship with your manager is absolutely fundamental to how you feel at work and how happy you are at work, because it's the manager that delivers on you feel fairly paid, you get recognised when you do something well, you feel really well informed, you feel empowered to get on and do your job and have the space to do it. You feel that they care for you as a person, your well-being. They make you feel proud of what you do, and they're developing you as a person. Managers that do that have happy teams, and those teams outperform their competitors. Those people give more extra discretionary effort. So in all of our research, profits are higher, productivity is higher, staff turnover is lower, sickness is lower, and they are the most successful managers and they are the most successful organisations.
Love that. Love that. It's so true. It's so true. It also, just to add to that, works both ways. You know, as an individual, like make friends with everyone that you work with, you know, your manager, your teammates, and vice versa. Because so many people I speak to, I'm like, how did you get that job? Oh, you know, John, my old manager, took me with him, or you know, I used to work with that person, and you know, I got the phone call and things like that. So it's really just building human connections, community. To use your point earlier, it's so valuable, and it just stands you in great stead as you go through life. So,
and all our work or research says that if you're happy in your job, you are paid more, you're more likely to be promoted, you have better mental health and well-being. So it's in your interest to be happy at work and to build those relationships. And people, I often have people saying to me, yeah, but I do all this hard work and nobody ever recognises how hard I've worked and what I've done. And I say to them, but do you recognise that in others? I said, have you ever stopped and said to your manager, oh, you dealt with that really well? I say, well, no, I shouldn't be doing that. I said, do it. If you do that, you'll be amazed. Your manager within days will start saying the same to you. And if you do that to your colleagues, you'll say to them, you know what, I really admire the way you did that, or that was really fantastic. So having the largesse and the confidence inside you, no matter what level you're at a business, goes to your point about you can be a leader, whatever job you do, just to acknowledge what people are doing, you get it back in spades. I mean, and it creates an atmosphere in any company that's super positive, where everybody there is acknowledging great work. And they're at Workall. We've got a really brilliant COO, Amy, and from day one, she did that. Every week we have, you know, you can recognise somebody in the team and they get a call out for something they've done. And so it's almost become institutionalised that you recognise people that do a great job.
Brilliant. And then maybe the litmus test is I have built a career headhunting people from companies where I'm trying to poach them. And happy people are way harder to move. And to your point, money's rarely number one thing. It's always the people. You know, they're a bit easier. I don't like my boss, my team. Oh, you know, toxic work environment. The culture's not great. All these human things are often what's a pull and a push for someone. So, it's absolutely true. Love it. Thank you so much, Mark. Really appreciate the conversation. Thanks for joining me.
My pleasure.
Thanks. Awesome.